Member for Regina, Lewvan.
Madam Speaker, the new Minister of Public Services and Procurement has yet to agree to appear before the Government Operations Committee. As Vice Chair of that committee, I'm wondering when this government will respond to the all-party report we tabled more than 9 months ago calling on Canada Post to restore door-to-door mail delivery. Or should Canadians write "return to sender" on the Liberal platform as broken promises pile up faster than junk mail around a community mailbox?
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Services and Procurement.
Well, of course, Madam Speaker, our government has delivered on its promise and its commitment to suspend implementation of community mailboxes and to undertake a comprehensive review of Canada Post, and the member knows that very well because he participated in that very review, the review undertaken by the Committee on Government Operations, accompanied by a special task force. We have their reports. We have all of the evidence. The government is considering the future of this treasured national institution that is Canada Post and its employees, and we will report to the House this year.
The honourable member for Regina, Lewvan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the end of last week, I asked, when will the government respond to the report on the future of Canada Post that our Government Operations Committee tabled in this House more than 9 months ago? And what I'd like to do this evening is discuss 3 key elements of that report that I believe this government needs to address. The first point is the Liberal election promise to restore door-to-door mail delivery. This was a key promise in the Liberal platform. Now, when this issue actually came up to our committee, the Liberal members of the Government Operations Committee were only willing to recommend restoring door-to-door mail delivery in neighbourhoods that had lost it after the last federal election campaign began, so after August 3rd, 2015. In the NDP's view, that falls a little bit short of what was promised during the election, but nonetheless, Mr. Speaker, it would be a big step in the right direction in terms of ensuring that Canadians enjoy a service that's available in the rest of the industrialized world, and that is particularly important to seniors and to people with mobility impairments, Mr. Speaker. We've heard nothing from the government on this really since the election, and even we haven't heard anything since our report. It's been brought to my attention that at various places in Regina, Canada Post has established new community mailboxes in neighbourhoods that still have door-to-door delivery. Ostensibly, they're to provide service to businesses or multi-unit buildings, but it seems like in some cases these community box installations are far larger than are actually warranted by the number of businesses nearby, and it makes citizens wonder whether Canada Post management might still be committed to the idea of converting neighbourhoods away from door-to-door service and onto community boxes. So we need clarity from the government on that point. The second point I want to mention, Mr. Speaker, is the Canada Post pension plan. Because, of course, there's a notion that Canada Post has this huge unfunded pension liability and therefore it can't do anything. The government has used that for a justification to demand concessions from employees. But, Mr. Speaker, the whole reason for this perceived pension deficit is that Canada Post is required to value its pension on a solvency basis, which really doesn't make sense for a public enterprise. The federal public service has its pensions valued on a going concern basis. If Canada Post did the same, it wouldn't have this pension deficit, and that's exactly what our committee recommended. Third thing, Mr. Speaker, is new business lines for Canada Post. There's been a decline in the volume of letter mail, which has not quite been made up by the increase in parcel service. We need to get Canada Post into new areas of business to make good use of the infrastructure that it has across the country. Our committee recommended that, and we need to hear the government's response. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Services.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleague from Regina, Lewvan, who I know has spent a great deal of time and energy on this file and on Canada Post as a member of the Government Operations Committee, and I always respect and thank him for his constructive interventions in this and other debates. The first thing I would say, Mr. Speaker, is that it's one of the great pleasures I have had as Parliamentary Secretary in Public Services and Procurement, which of course has oversight over Canada Post Corporation, reports to Parliament through the Minister of Public Services and Procurement, is to get to know this very innovative corporation. Of course, we know it's an $8 billion corporation, a very innovative corporation that continues to innovate, but at the same time continues to provide services in literally every corner, nook and cranny of our great country. Il faut surtout, l'un des grands plaisirs.
And one of my great joys has been to meet with and discuss the Canada Post employees, whether it be through the union employees, CUPW, or the management or other people who work for Canada Post. Well, they work diligently every day to provide the service that is so dear to us and that distinguishes us as Canadians, given the vast area of our country. This corporation has some 53,000 employees and does us proud.
This raises three very important points, and those are all things that I can assure him are under active consideration as the government prepares its response to not only the committee's good work, but the task force that was also formed pursuant to the next election. Of course, we have honoured our commitment to put a moratorium on rolling out community mailboxes. Of course, we have put literally everything on the table when it comes to reviewing Canada Post, its mandate and its plans. And we look forward before the end of this year to providing a fulsome response to those reports and to the very interested and interesting interventions of Canadians that we've received all the way through, and the result, of course, of our many consultations, both formal and informal, with stakeholders of Canada Post, with users of Canada Post, and of course, most importantly perhaps, with the employees of Canada Post who work very, very hard every day. So I want to assure the member that all three of the things that he mentioned are obviously considerable components of the review that is underway and that will be culminating this year. And I want to assure him that his good work and that of other members and the committee that he was a part of and that furnished such interesting reflections to the government will be taken under very active consideration. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Member for
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I really do want to thank the member across the way for his kind words. However, I have to say that when he suggests the government has kept its commitment to put a moratorium on community mailboxes, that isn't very reassuring because, in fact, the Liberal Party committed to much more than that, to returning to door-to-door delivery. Liberal members of the Government Operations Committee also recommended that. So we need to see the government actually move forward on that commitment, Mr. Speaker. Now, we didn't hear a clear statement from the Parliamentary Secretary about putting the Canada Post pension plan on a going concern basis, like the pension plan of the rest of the federal public service. And we really haven't heard a lot of specifics about what new business lines this government sees Canada Post taking on, particularly given that the Liberals seem to have ruled out postal banking, which I would suggest was the most.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I will urge my honourable friend to bear with us as we prepare this very fulsome, I know, and forward-looking position with respect to Canada Post. I do direct him to our platform commitments, with respect to Canada Post, and would point out once again that we have respected and honored our commitment to Canadians to suspend the rollout of community mailboxes and to review the mandate and the business plans of Canada Post. That's what we committed to do. That's what we are doing, Mr. Speaker. So I can assure him that if he will, and I know he will, stay very interested and stay tuned in this debate, keep furnishing his reflections on the issue and stay engaged with those stakeholders that I know we are all currently engaged with respect to Canada Post, that by the end of this year, the government will come forward with a very exciting plan, I think, for Canada Post Corporation. Merci, Monsieur le Président.